Hello and welcome back to Parlay. This prompt was written by True Parley Grandmaster Foot. Hope you'll enjoy listening. It's about, well, post-Automata depression. That's what Mr. Food is calling it, Near Automata. So after playing Near Automata, and if you've been following the Mr. Food Parlay after the previous Parlay about Near Automata, Mr. Food sunk into a dark depression. And this video is I know how Mr. Food presents it, but I'm going to suggest that this is a story, a tale for you about one game, its effect on somebody who wrote an extremely long Google document shared with me with all of the parlay from the past year and a half all together. And this is page 33 of that document. So I know that, and now you have to know it too. When I ask people what I do for work, I sometimes describe this document. Let's read it together, shall we? This is once again less of a typical parlay, Mr. Food begins, and more of a transition into, or introduction to, the final act of this series, the Invisible Wall series, about the boundaries of video game design and Mr. Food's intimate relationship with them. No spoilers for anything in this one. Let us start at the end of our previous parlay. What did I do after experiencing the incredible Near Automata? I'm gonna say automata and automata differently, and you're just gonna have to accept that. Stage 1. Denial. I realized that I had played something extraordinary. Games are great. This is what the medium was building up towards. I need to see where this art form goes next. But those were the thoughts of a fool. I proceeded to drown in all of the good video games, the so-called masterpieces, and they were fine. But none of them reached the quality level of a Near Automata, and how could they? The Holy Grail has been achieved, and there is nowhere left to go. This is where I slowly fell into stage 2, depression. 2 years have passed. In that time, I had played about 40 games, and by now I was feeling hopeless. Laughing with you, not at you here. No games were able to reach the heights of an automata. It was now that I learned about the concept of the invisible wall. Suddenly, everything made sense. What I loved about automata was its obliteration of my, Mr. Food's, invisible wall. It redefined what I thought possible in the medium of video games. And when I looked back at all those games I'd played, I saw games trying to be good, but no games trying to be novel. No one was pushing the envelope as dramatically as I wanted them to. This frustration led to 2 distinct consequences for me. The first one was that I stopped playing games for their emotional peaks, and I started playing them for their mechanics. Curveball, I began to think more about build systems, and then I came across this community by clicking on a YouTube stream, a stream where Zandy farmed Affinity on Hydron and Warframe while explaining the one build to rule them all. Trademark, I didn't trademark it. And also why polygamy is a good idea. I think polyamory is a good idea. I'm not sure marrying the multiple people. It's a topic for another time. Suffice it to say, I was hooked. Mr. Food was hooked on my channel. Thank you. That's incredibly flattering and just satisfying to know that this is how you arrived at this position. Anyway, sadly, as much as I like my builds, they don't deliver the same kind of emotional peaks that highly focused stories can. Yeah. The second consequence, was that I went out to seek other forms of media. I started watching more movies, I got more into music, and I started reading manga, just to name a few. They proceeded to redefine what I thought possible in those art forms, and I loved it. I found my emotional peaks in there, while video games, at least for emotional peaks, kept on disappointing me. As COVID came and went, I noticed a trend. As a famous internet funny man once said, meme plus meme equals meme, and in the world of video games, many studios seemed to have adopted a game plus game equals game attitude. A trend that has reached a ridiculous extreme in the past 2 years. Duet Night Abyss, Marvel Rivals, Fortnite, and Palworld, many others, have adopted an interpolation approach to game design. What if we made Warframe again, but with a Genshin Impact art style? Overwatch, but with the Marvel heroes you all know and love. Blech. A battle royale, but every franchise under the blue sky is represented and mixed up into a colorful sludge of nonsense. Pokemon, but with the progression of a survival sandbox. Plagiarism aside, this is just lacking in imagination. Yeah, and it's no offense if you enjoy those games, just that the trend maybe is... I really don't want this to be a discussion about AI art. Yeah, neither do I. But one of my core issues with the concept is that it is, by its nature, limited to interpolation in the near future. relatively near future, not getting into it because it's not the topic. Generative AI is mathematically incapable of extrapolation. It can study classical art as much as it wants, but it would never come up with abstract art the same way humans do. At least for me, the extrapolation is the spice that makes new forms of art and the tool sets they create that create them interesting. And these human-made games feel oddly AI generated to me in how they seem to be incapable of extrapolating, and by extension, incapable of breaking the invisible wall, the boundary of where game design is generally now. They do create an illusion of novelty oftentimes, while actually remaining as mundane as ever. This is the sorry state of video games we live in right now. Just to quickly head off what I know will be some objection to the generative AI thing, we can at least an bigger group of people would be willing to agree that generative AI is not designed to extrapolate. When Mr. Foot says it can study classical art as much as it wants, but it would never come up with abstract art the same way humans did, I feel like that the same way humans did is doing a lot of work there. A generative AI model could come up with I guess a lot of things, but it wouldn't be it coming up with them. It's not really it. It's the source of, initial work, or like the person who notices that it spat out something that reminds them of this. That would be the person coming up with the thing. And it also didn't really come up with it. Like the origin of an art form or an extrapolation matters and affects the texture of the product that comes out. The specific way that seeing art in a gallery, maybe even if it's just like generative AI, triggers you to come up with something affects the product you put out. Like the showing your work matters. It's used for something when you make the thing that you extrapolate from that work. So yeah, hopefully people would be willing to agree with that. But we won't make it one about generative AI. I do think that's an interesting point. Mr. Fu, you created an interesting parallel between the reason that the games coming out now feel oddly AI generated. You're not the first person I've heard make that. I've heard some people make it as a joke about a noteworthy one was Triangle Strategy, I think is what the game is called. That might be a great game. I'm sorry. Again, it's the trend that I think is bad. And the reason is that it's derivative, it's interpolating instead of extrapolative, just like the AI models are targeted to be. And so that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way before. Okay, so there's more of the parlay, but I hope you see my enthusiasm for this as a story, right? I do want to comment on it a little bit. I thought about doing this parlay in a way where I just read the whole thing, because it is kind of a linear story. But I'll give you a summary of where we were so far in the story before we continue. I have some stuff to say about this part. Yeah, it's interesting to me how highlighting the thing about why, as you stopped being excited about, the good video games, what you did in response, very satisfying to see someone to kind of walked the same steps that I've experienced in my life too. I would describe what you did in stage 2 depression. 2 years have passed, that thing. Is that you kind of you retargeted your interest in video games. You tried to optimize media for their art forms, basically. You felt like video games were kind of failing to deliver this one thing, and you looked for mediums that maybe would be better at that would specialize in that. And then you got that fulfillment from there, and looked at what video games, in reverse, maybe would specialize in. Maybe let's have some of that. And, you maybe enjoyed that. Buildcraft. I do think that's one of the more unique things about video games. Cool. Not just video games, I guess. Any games. That's very interesting. That's neat. It would be very interesting to me, and maybe it'll come up later, but probably not too much in this parlay, to talk about, this might surprise some of the audience, but there are some people who think it's quite unartistic to care about the strengths of your medium, I guess. There are a lot of, I would refer to them as purists personally, who think of it as you put out the stories that are inside of you, and you put them out in the medium that is inside of you, like that is innate to you somehow. I'm sorry, but just politely for a minute, bear with me. You don't... Making something good in a medium is working with the tools available in that medium, working to the strengths of that medium. I will, for the sake of discussion, try to be generous and say that that isn't the same as playing to the strengths of the medium, thinking about what art to make by playing to the strengths of the medium. But we can agree it's pretty darn close, isn't it? Doing anything that means you are familiar with and skilled at using a medium that you know is very close to, you make things because they are a good fit for the medium. That those things are, I think they're the same, but you'll at least agree they're like, that's extremely close, right? And I don't think that the distinction between those two is meaningful. I think that I think people who think that they put out the stories inside them and then it's in the medium that is theirs, maybe just don't notice that they are doing the thing that whatever. And I don't mean to be pedantic about that. I just think it's interesting to consider how, like, one way to look at this entire thing for Mr. Foot is, Mr. Foot, are you seeking emotional peaks in a medium that isn't that good at them? Now, in the previous Nier Automata focused parlay, we concluded no. There are a lot of tools video games present that can be leveraged to create emotional peaks. And later in this parlay, we'll talk about this more. You have gone on to concede that yeah, that toolbox is there, but there's still some concerns if we're not getting games like that. But nevertheless, we can point to lots of tools that you could use to create emotional peaks in video games. They seem like good tools for that. The question remains, where are they then? Where are those things? If we, people sitting on the side of the road spectating the game developers whizzing by in their game development mobiles, then why aren't we seeing anyone fly by with that tool set? Wouldn't it be easy for them to realize too that you could create emotional peaks in video games using these tools, and then there would be a bunch of those whizzing by and we would see them? We'll get back to that later. I also wanted to comment on the idea that it kind of feels like developers sort of like can't, like they're incapable of extrapolating. This is something that bothers me a lot too. I will just put my 2 cents out there in this $9 of like what I think is going on. I believe very strongly that those people, the developer of, Pal World or whatever, the single developer, I don't know, take someone from the development team that had a big creative role. That person can not make something derivative. They are capable of making something extrapolative. They can extrapolate. It's not that they like can't or something. I think I'm good at extrapolating, and there's nothing special about me that allows me to be good at that. I have qualities that get me there in my own way, maybe, and maybe that path is more efficient for me, and maybe that's why I've gotten there earlier. But it is eminently possible for this other person to get there. And I would argue that even if you drag your feet, it's achievable in a human lifetime. Like, let's just imagine that, Johnny Palworld, the lead developer of Palworld, isn't like particularly derivative, but we're using Palworld as an example. I don't know, it is particularly derivative actually. It is, let's just imagine that they're 40. You might say, but they can't just like change and become that kind of person now, can they? I really do believe that they literally could. It might take a while. Yeah, like 10 or 15 years if you move inefficiently. But if they genuinely pursued that goal, they 100% for sure, yes, would be able to achieve it. That's what I think. So why not? I think it's useful to think about the motivations acting upon them. And this might be very obvious to Mr. Foot. They are motivated by money. They feel like it is still enough of a bubble to, profit from or get your name out there through, doing this thing. Now, it's easy to defend such a person by saying, well, and by the way, making money isn't such an evil goal either. Goodness, there's a lot of qualifiers on this description. By saying, oh yeah, they just want to get their name out there. It's a first game, they wanted to be successful, so they did it this way with something people recognize, and that's how they blah, blah, blah. I guess there is a type of, I really want to make things in the world where you won't do that. Like, you can commit even harder and get something to be successful without doing the populism thing. That is possible. You can do that. You can argue that it's more difficult, and is that really worth it? That's okay. I'm just saying there are enough motivators that you get rewarded with, money, and it's enough easier and etc. You're not scared enough of the lawyers or whatever, that you're motivated to make a game like that instead of something that I think we can all agree it would probably be more fun to make, not a derivative work of somebody else's. The person, Johnny Palworld, might not think it would be more fun, but that doesn't mean that they're correct that it wouldn't be more fun from them. We can never know if it would be more fun from them. If initially forced at gunpoint, would they eventually have more fun if they made something more original? I would say definitely yes, but of course, I'm not going to claim to know for sure. I would just assume so. It depends what kind of gunpoint. So without this example getting too ridiculous, the reason I'm saying this is to suggest that it's not like some deficiency in the people. It's because of a bubble in the market, in my opinion. And thus, if people had a circumstance around them that was not a bubble in the market for this type of game design, they weren't so encouraged by their peers, or other publishers or whatever, it would be easier for them to notice that they would truly prefer to be doing this other thing. That's harder for them to notice because they're in this situation. But it is true, according to me, that they would be happier in every way. They'd be better off in every way if they just did this other thing that they would really prefer doing. But it's hard to notice that when this is all going on. Another way to word this entire thing I'm saying is it's hard to notice that being creative is fun in the current economy. You could say a lot of words there, I guess. And that's fine. That's not really anyone's fault. Crucially, for me, it's not a deficiency on the part of the creator. I wouldn't go seek out Johnny Palworld's next game. No, I do think that making Palworld is a sign that they won't make something interesting next, personally, rather than that they will. But I mean, they very well might. They could. They're physically able to do so. Just like, will they? Are the motivations there for them to? Maybe not the thing you expected in the middle of this parlay, Mr. Foot. But the reason I think it's relevant is to track something related to this topic. How do people get to the point where they make, your Nier Automata? I think one of the real kind of flies in the ointment of the Nier Automata discussion we had is that this isn't a spoiler, and that parlay is otherwise full of spoilers, so don't worry, is that the circumstances surrounding Nier Automata's existence are weird. They're unusual. They're not that intended, I guess, is a point I'm trying to make. Let me give you another example. I think that the Metal Gear Solid games, and that is somewhat, I would say, how Hideo Kojima has become popular, are acclaimed, and therefore, when Hideo Kojima, who is identified as being the face of that development team, goes on to make his own games, let's say Death Stranding, people have a tendency to think, oh, that means that will be even better, right? Because corporations are evil, and now he's like by himself, so it'll be better. Yeah. Whatever you think about Death Stranding, I would like to argue that it is a very unrestrained work, and that some of the bad things about Death Stranding are because it is unrestrained, like terminally unrestrained, almost completely unrestrained. And that in light of that, Metal Gear Solid is revealed to possibly be good because it was restrained, because he didn't get to do whatever he wanted. And Yoko Taro, the creative director of Nier Automata, is, I would argue, a very similar case. Looking at previous Yoko Taro games, it's not entirely clear that things were working when he got to just do his thing. It feels like the addition of Platinum Games, as much as it added some combat and core gameplay that was maybe missing from previous games. Mr. Foot had added this detail. I don't know. I haven't had the time to play those. I would also suggest that it kind of seems like the Platinum Games edition may have somewhat reined in united, focused ideas that Yoko Taro had, but which were unfocused previously. Thus, in the case of these types of creatives, those two, your auteur, if you want to say it that way, the cruel reality is that they are doing their best work when they cannot choose everything freely for what they want to do. And I bet you would find that this is largely true for most artists. People, when left to their own devices, want to sprawl, and it's very, very difficult to cut things down and avoid scope creep when you develop things, when you record a parlay. I have more notes than I'm reading for this parlay. I've already removed 2 or 3 topics, and there's an argument that you could remove more. I'm doing the best I can. And I do consistently get them to be around 45 minutes nowadays, so I feel like I'm at least kind of consistent now. I don't know. Anyway, so we'll continue, but I guess that was a big takeaway for me. I feel like where I'm going with having followed this series with you, Mr. Foot, is what caused those games to exist from a human dynamics perspective. Not how are they constructed out of their mechanics. We've talked about that, and it's useful too, and we should talk about it more. But also, the people who made that thing could have largely made it sooner. You know, the pieces were kind of there. It was possible for them to make something like that sooner, but they mostly did not. So why? You know, what changed? In the case of some of these games, like Nier Automata, I would argue that what you've told me about Nier Replicant in that parlay, the kind of previous game, a prequel, if you like, yeah, it is similar to Nier Automata, but it's different in ways that you might argue are small, but I would argue from a thematic perspective are very large. There are very large philosophical changes to the person who decided on that narrative, even though the actual change in practice is arguably a little bit small. And where did you get that? You see what I'm trying to say now? Like, where did you get that? Why did you make that change? Is it because you had a lot of unfamiliar employees at Platinum Games that you had to explain all of this to, and that caused you to simplify it in a way that benefited the narrative? I don't know. Well, I guess we'll never know. I did watch that documentary. That's an educated guess, but who knows? But I don't know. If you gave me a massive budget and Hideo Kojima or whatever, a developer like this that I don't particularly enjoy the output of so far, I would try to get him and a team with him to produce a game that I would like, at least, by doing that. Like, by making him explain it to everyone, basically. Everyone, you know, the visual modeler, the visual modeler, the 3D modeler, the composer, the etc. I would want the creative director to explain this song is going to be in this part of the game. Here is all of that to every damn person on the team. And I wonder, for the massive inconvenience that would be to Hideo Kojima, I don't particularly care, would that maybe cause a similar benefit? Could you intentionally engineer that happenstance with this very contrived method? And would that result in such a game? Anyway, okay. When last we left off with the story, we had Mr. Foot playing Nier Automata, seeing it as something extraordinary, and then realizing that as they played other games considered to be good, the problem was that a lot of them were not pushing the sort of creative envelope in the way that Mr. Foot wanted them to. Mr. Foot's invisible wall, perception of what video games can do, had moved, and these other games were not really trying to move it. They largely stopped searching for that in gaming, found it elsewhere, and started getting interested in mechanics from games. The industry kind of stagnates around this time. It's 2021, and 4 years have passed since I experienced Automata, and by now I've almost given up on video games. This is stage 3, Revelations. And so Mr. Foot continues that it was then that the YouTube algorithm sent me a video that ended up changing my view on art as a whole. This is it. I'll link it in the description. It's the song Daredevil from Ace Combat 7, a song from a game I had only heard of in passing, but one I had always brushed off as something that was not for me. Exact same thing for me, actually. The song was, for lack of a better word, epic, which confused me because this was not this was an arcadey game about fighter jets. It wasn't an epic game. It was an arcadey game about fighter jets where you collect points against the time limit. I was confused what kind of experience might justify such a soundtrack. Against my better judgment, I bought the game at full price on a whim. Playing Ace Combat 7 was a humbling experience, both mechanically and artistically. It had me stumbling, trying to learn basic controls, because it was playing on a flight stick. Did you buy a flight stick for just this game? Anyway, controlling the unfamiliar entity that is a fighter jet. But nevertheless, I adored everything about the game that I had labeled not for me. I never had a large interest in fighter jets or the fantasy of the fighter jet pilot. I rarely enjoy arcade games, and I never liked long mission briefings and super objective focused design. But this was incredibly enjoyable. It delivered emotional peak after emotional peak, and the game is really building up to something. And when I finally reach mission 19 and that moment where Daredevil starts playing, as everything comes together in an intense explosion of synesthesia, very similar technique to Nier Automata's Big Highs, I finally felt it. It was that love of video games and the experiences they can create, the love that I hadn't felt in the 4 years since playing Nier Automata. And that was the moment where I understood the error in my reasonings. Ace Combat 7 is a great game, but it's nowhere as good as Automata's Holy Grail. I came to learn that the Ace Combat series has been creating comparable synesthetic moments, doing a similar thing with emotional peaks, for years, right? The series you could call samey, right? That means it is not novel in the same global way that Nier Automata had been. I could talk about what makes Ace Combat 7 great. I could talk about its smart mission designs, timed music, beautiful graphics, or how the mythos of the Ace, the pilot, I guess, only works as well as it does because we never hear our protagonists speak. All worthwhile topics for another day, but this is not about that game. No, the insight I gained was that I liked it as much as I did because its toolset was novel to me. It had reset what I thought was possible. I stopped asking why video games wouldn't do X or Y because, well, in this case they did, and I just wasn't aware of it. My invisible wall had once again moved. After I finished Ace Combat 7, I stopped playing games I thought I would like, and instead started to play games that I thought would be novel to me, because that's where those resets of expectations can be found. And counterintuitively, this resulted in me enjoying more games on average. That is how I learned to love games once again. If there's one thing I would want you, the listeners of this parlay, to take away from this, then it is to try to pursue novelty. I realize that's a bit of an absurd proposition. Finding something you weren't looking for sounds scary, and it is because you aren't fully in control anymore. What you play might no longer be the experience you wanted. You don't really know what you're signing up for, that's for me. Might no longer be the thing you dreamt of, but trust me when I say that it's fine. Something else will be there instead. And if you look for it long enough, novelty will take you to new places that will reset your expectations in ways you couldn't have imagined in the first place. Or at least that's what the pursuit of novelty did to you, to Mr. Foot. Let's pause here just briefly, and then we'll bring it on home. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting twist in the story. Yeah, there are kind of two big players here. The first one for me is Ace Combat 7 managed to bring back that thing that you had really enjoyed in Nier Automata, but there is something different about the way that it achieved it. And I think that matters and I think is concerning, actually. And then the pursuing novelty thing. Okay, so the first thing is the Ace Combat 7 did the thing. The difference between the two effects, I agree with you, Mr. Foot, is probably context. Ace Combat 7 was shifted your invisible wall for you because you had not experienced, for example, other Ace Combat games. Which I had known to be kind of samey prior to this parlay. And so the first one will give you that effect, but if you were to play more, you probably wouldn't get that much of that again or that many more times. You know, it would wear off. Whereas I would predict that Nier Automata would be a sort of invisible wall shift or novel to almost anyone, almost regardless of what video games they'd played. You could have played almost every video game ever, and you would probably still think that Nier Automata was doing that thing. Whether you care about that is another matter, but it would likely feel like a reset of expectations to people. Yes, there is some greater achievement, some more elusive task that Nier Automata succeeds at that the Ace Combat series is perhaps not pursuing in the same way. Cool. And so what do we have to say about that? Well, first of all, it's that novelty and these resets of expectations, it's excitement about video games. It's very easy to get for a little while. If you just go find all the little corners of things you haven't, explored or been exposed to before, you'll keep getting that very easily for a time, and then it will kind of wear off, or you'll get all the low-hanging fruit down. At that point, there is still a real concern. I mean, you're gonna run out of those. You can run out of those, I think. A determined person, and an idiot, I suppose, could exhaust all of those from the world. Just in the past few years, I grabbed into coffee and IPA beer, like basically just hops, tea, but beer, tea. And just today, a very close tea comrade of mine sent me single origin chocolate, where even the cocoa butter that is used to smooth out the chocolate is also single origin from the same thing. And it was crazy how like distinct the flavors were. It's insane. Like I've never experienced that with chocolate. I guess because a lot of the other ingredients used to fill it, we could get into a whole thing about why this is hard to do with chocolate, but aren't as distinct in flavor. But this place went the extra mile to do that, and boy, can you taste it. It's blatantly obvious to any random person on earth. You, listener, could easily tell these apart. They taste like night and day different, even though they're, from like a recipe perspective, essentially the same, just because the chocolate is from a different place. You know, I suppose they're different, you know, cultivars of the cacao bean. One of them is the pod is all white. I saw a picture of these. They're scary looking. The inside of the cacao pods is white normally, but the outside of this one is white as well. Very strange. And that one tasted like, it was like lemongrassy. Anyway, you can exhaust these, is what I'm saying. I think you can. You can, if that was all there was, make the world boring in terms of novelty. You can eat up all the novelty. Like fossil fuel, there's a lot of it sitting around because humanity has been going for a while. Well, or dinosaurs were going for a while. But there is yet a limited amount of it. And new novelty categories are not being made very fast, if that makes sense. They are being made, I would argue. There can be new genres of fiction or entire internet thing, genre of social media. I don't know, that doesn't sound fun, but that could happen. That has happened before. Things like that, you see what I'm trying to say. But not very fast. And there are lots of things that it's a physical thing. So, you know, you can do cocoa, you know, chocolate, cacao, chocolate and tea and coffee. But I mean, those three, you just ate up like 4,000 years of human cultivation with the, you see what I'm trying to say? Like, you're going to run out if you do that. So there's still a pretty big concern for someone living their life directly purposefully pursuing those things, directly purposefully consuming that well of novelty. There is still a significant concern that it's very realistic to run out of that type of novelty. And we have a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. Nier Automata is an example of something that has gone a little further and created its own kind of pocket novelty thing. I'm starting to call the invisible wall moves novelty, but you get what I mean. However, while it's really easy to pin down why some things are that kind of base context novelty, creating the context-less novelty, while we have confirmation that it's basically possible, I wouldn't say I feel like we have enumerated how to do that, is the concern. And can you, within reason, enumerate how to do that? Put a pin in it for the end of the parlay. Part 2. People discovering things by pursuing novelty. Yeah, I mean, Mr. Fruit, I'm very happy with you doing something I do impulsively and should stop, because I admire this, encouraging the audience to go pursue novelty. Basically, play video games, look for video games to play with different priorities than you, on average, listener, currently do. And Mr. Fruit is suggesting I, Mr. Fruit, think that the way you do it is by looking for genres or gameplay loops you're familiar with, and you should do the opposite of that, potentially. I agree, but I don't think people will do that, and I think the reason is that they maybe you, listener, do not want the thing that we're saying that the process is good at. Pursuing the novelty gets you these emotional peaks, and you learn things and you see the world, and it's like exploring and you're outside your comfort zone. But I think for a lot of people, video games are the start and the finish of what they want from them is comfort. That's it. And the one thing you do not get from pursuing the novelty is comfort. I will just say, I hope it doesn't offend you, listener of this parlay, when I say it's pretty hard to know if you like that novelty pursuit thing. So it might be worth maybe inching a little bit toward a weirder game in a genre you're familiar with and just see what you think. Let's say you like first person shooters and you just look for more the newest first person shooter. What if you take the most similar first person shooters to the ones you're familiar with, but then have another 6 months of the year where you pursue the most different first person shooters that, to the ones you're familiar with? Which time do you have more fun? You see what I'm trying to say? And you could gently experiment with this without going whole hog, which is totally what I would recommend doing. Go crazy. Play a thing that is a different genre, if you will, every single time. That's what I want people to do. But I don't think people are going to do that. And so maybe just inch around and see what you think. I think for a lot of people, the desire for comfort from video games, it comes from a lack of that thing. And 2025 is a year where I would argue that is mostly not a concern anymore. It's no offense. It's okay if it's a concern for any individual person. I'm just saying objectively, let's say you like first-person shooters, there are enough good, free first-person shooters for you to play for the rest of time. You never, ever, ever again have to go find a good first-person shooter. There are enough of them, and there will probably continue to be enough of them. Even if you restrict it to free ones, you don't even want to have to pay for this, that anyone with an internet connection and a computer that can run them can play infinite good first-person shooters forever. You do not need to go acquire that comfort anymore. It's just there now. Humanity has advanced to this hallowed point. Infinite first-person shooters. 2025. Future humans will have flying cars. Anyway, I mean, we probably will, but and so that would be my suggestion, is that if you can get comfortable enough with that, perhaps that allows you to let go of the feeling like you need to be interested in the genre you're familiar with, or you won't have that source of comfort. You really don't. You don't need to be interested in that genre to get that source of comfort. You can just have it. And so maybe it would be fun to just do a little excursion into something else. I will say briefly that I think services like Game Pass are very good for this. They allow you to, have a lighter month in your life, pay for 1 month, and just try like 6 games without committing to them. After all, you know that you're playing genres that you don't know if you like, so don't buy it. Do something that lets you kind of try a bunch. I would just maybe recommend considering, like, if you like it for an hour or two, maybe stop and buy the game so that you don't constantly have to have the subscription. But that's just me. Just some thoughts. That has been very useful. Can you tell that I do this? So I think it's wonderful that Mr. Foot recommended that. So of course I can't resist having a section where we talk about that. All right. Bring it on home. The light at the end of the tunnel. The lights at the end of the tunnel, plural. When I started this series, this was all I would have to say on the topic. Not anymore. Things have changed considerably since the Ace Combat 7 incident. In the previous parlay about Nier Automata, we talked about the methods of automata and how they can not be copied. You, Zandy I, pushed back hard on that and questioned how I could say that Nier Automata's achievements cannot be replicated. You argued that we have discovered the toolkit and we just need to apply it. That's a good summary of my argument, yep. My reply to that is that it is an empiric argument. If it's so easy to replicate, then why aren't we seeing games using its tools 7 years after Nier Automata released? Or at least that would have been my argument if it was that art hadn't started appearing literally in the past 2 years since I began this series. I'll argue that the single defining tool of Nier Automata is a continuous reset of expectations with 2 distinct results: a wow effect component and a certain vulnerable mindset that the audience is put into as a result of repeatedly being forced to adapt to new ideas. I noticed how these concepts started popping up in other forms of media like movies and manga, but until very recently I was still waiting for video games to follow Nier Automata's legacy of aggressive perspective shifting, contextualized gameplay elements, and of course continuous expectation resets. Really good summary of those tools, by the way. The best game I've played this year, 2024, is titled 1000X Resist. This game was popular generally, I noticed. I will not get into the details. If you're interested, take 10 hours to experience it for yourself. It's already on my list. All I'll say is that it uses the toolset that Automata introduced, along with some of its own tricks, while feeling distinctly different in its context and execution. A focused experience about memory, trauma, revolution, family, purpose, regret, and the unchanging patterns of humanity and what lies beyond. An extraordinarily dense and beautiful bit of artistry. That being said, it is much more limited in scope than Automata. I'm still waiting for a larger scale project to take the plunge into the waters Nier Automata has created, but seeing the artistic success of 1000X Resist makes me confident that that's just around the corner. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that 1000X Resist and the examples from other forms of media were directly inspired by Nier Automata. In fact, I highly doubt there was any direct inspiration for any of them. It's more that the artistic zeitgeist has reached a point where more and more artists are trying these methods and achieving results. Some have started to call this toolset meta-modernism, but I don't personally find this label to be very helpful. Yeah, yuck, not a fan. Last minute addition, my words seem to be prophetic, Mr. Fruit adds in blue. I just finished Alan Wake 2, and it also does some very interesting things relating to this topic that we'll talk about at some point. I smelled something like this in Alan Wake 2 too. I haven't played it yet. I believe that is the first larger scale project that got somewhat close to Nier Automata, and there's a lot to say there. I can't and won't get into it now for obvious time reasons. Finally, an outlook. As fun as it was to discuss my way out of post-Automata depression, none of that answers a different question. I'm sure we will see lots of games that take Automata's toolset to create great experiences. 1000X Resist is just the first one I've seen, and there are many more to come in the future, Alan Wake 2 maybe. But what is the next toolset, the next extrapolation? The following set of parlay in this series will attempt to answer that new question. Please do come along as we explore the world of truly cruel games, the realms of hypothetical, fictional, and imaginary art, and finally the chaotic nature of timing and getting it. In some arbitrary order, perhaps some more we'll see. I hope to see you all on the other side as we try to wrap up this behemoth of a series. Long may it live. I don't have a lot to say about the outlook. I should have read that after some comments about what you said before. But awesome. I agree that that is a really good direction to go in next. You know, not only, yeah, I feel like people can make new novelty, as I discussed in the previous section, but I don't really feel like we are anywhere near owning that. I feel like the gaming industry is just taking its first baby steps with that new tool, and processing it more would be, yes, good, valuable. Like build systems, my own topic of most channels that I run, I think that this is something that is on the current edge of game development. This is currently a new thing to be doing intentionally and purposefully, and not as a kind of side effect or, you know, pretentiousness bait, or it's complicated because people think complicated things are good. I think a lot of games build systems are like that. I think that the first games that are genuinely, purposefully, truly trying to do the thing for its own sake because it's just fun, it's good, are coming now, and the understanding of the mechanics of doing that are flimsy. You know, the opposite of disrespect to the people doing it. They clearly managed to figure it out. I'm just saying, doing that consistently, you know, if you gave those same let's say the 1000X Resist developers, if you let them make 5 more games in time dilation than we saw them all now, would any of the other 4, you know, be hits basically for that subject? I don't know. A lot of games that I feel like have good build systems, other games by that development team within a short time don't have a good build system. And so they either don't care about that and it just kind of happened, or they got kind of lucky, or like the blend of elements they created just worked. About the only developer I feel like consistently has sensible build system ideas at the very least is probably Supergiant Games. Hades, Bastion, Transistor, Pyre, Hades 2. I think all of those games, every game they've ever made, has a significantly good build system. Though Bastion's is quite light, I still feel like it's good. You know, it gets the basic things right. It basically understands the concept. And then Transistor is a genuinely inspired idea. I just don't think the combat holds up to it that well. Pyre and Hades have, in my opinion, some of the best build systems of all time. regardless of whether you like that flavor of build system, I just think they're some of the best crafted. And it's interesting to note that they always go for that in every game that they've made. You know, that comes to mind. They seem to feel like they understand what makes that system tick. And indeed, a lot of the things that I try to enumerate when we talk about this in videos, I feel like that is one of the few developers where I feel like if you apply that logic to this game, they are doing it. They seem to have come up with the same thing on their own. So other people will too, of course. I'm not any smarter than these people. I just happen to be focusing on it earlier. And just like Mr. Foot said, as the industry becomes more favorable, and it seems less risky, I guess, to take the plunge into getting a big emotional peak using this combination of tools, more people will do it. You know, there's no doubt that, you know, build systems will improve and progress over time, and I don't need to push them to get there. I just wanted to go faster. Anyway, I just want them now, yeah. One thing I wanted to add in this section is that I thought your response to my argument was really good. You know, in the Nier Automata parlay, I said, we have the toolkit to do the thing that you liked in Nier Automata right here, and we just need to apply it. And then you said, but that's an empiric argument. If it's so easy, then where are all the results? I thought it was briefly worth talking about. I feel like I know why we haven't seen those results. So why? Yeah, I actually don't think that's a problem for this argument at all, and I will explain why. Why not? I think the biggest reason, personally, the number one, much bigger than any of the other reasons, that's enough on its own, is people think that these games are just pretentious. That is the biggest thing, in my opinion. People don't think it's good to do that thing, except for a few very specific people. And meaning no offense to some of the people who like these games, they often describe them in a way that is, to be blunt, pretentious garbage, you know, not why it's interesting. There's nothing like higher or noble for you as a human being that makes things good. Like, a thing is good if you can translate it into amenities. Consuming something that is considered high art isn't good unless you translate that into amenities for your existence. The reason that I like Nier Automata and its themes and the way that it presents them and resets expectations and does things to my brain and emotions is because I gained something from it. I grew as a person from experiencing it. If you experience it and you don't gain something from it, you didn't do anything wrong. It's just a tool targeted for a specific moment in people's lives. That's it. It's not like bad or wrong to not enjoy it. Better quality chocolate, to use my example before, would probably taste weird if you hadn't had like other good chocolate. And just like my example about games before, I think that people that don't have an abundance of chocolate they simply like the flavor of, you could right now go get a chocolate bar from the kitchen that is a flavor you like. It tastes basically like chocolate, and you would like it. You have as much of that as you want, and it's fine. So now maybe you're interested in exploring, you know, okay, like what would be some other, what do you mean other flavors of chocolate? You know what I mean? Having this tasting set of chocolate, I almost immediately had an answer. It was very obvious. But I only enjoyed that because if I wanted to, I could have bitten into a chocolate bar that I like the taste of, or I don't know if I actually have one right now, but I could have went and bought one. You get what I mean? If I wanted to spend the money on that. And I think it's the same thing here. I think that if you zoom out even further, a lot of people just don't realize yet that we live in a world where we're post-scarcity on the basic game genre thing you like. You don't need to fight to find more of that anymore. And therefore, you maybe could consider exploring these other things. And it is only in that mindset that I feel like people are going to enjoy this kind of thing anyway. I think a lot of people are simply very obviously, outwardly, clearly not in that mindset. And therefore, is it really the time to throw a game like this at them? And I bet you a lot of other developers that are creatively minded about this stuff have thought the same thing and went, let's hold off. We'll see, maybe that period is ending right now. But Alan Wake 2 and 1000x Resist were very popular. Again, that normally doesn't matter to me. But I just described why you'd expect them to be very unpopular, and that has no mark on their quality, but just very narrow is basically what that means. Yet they were not very narrow. People seemed to like them. Now, there will be some of people say they like them because they didn't get it, and they know that that usually means people are going to treat it like it's some highfalutin piece of art, and that's associated in our society as being a positive quality if you say you liked those fancy things. And so they'll just say they liked it because of that. And in fact, like, what? But what did you like about it? And they won't, they'll go, it was weird. Which, I mean, that's, by the way, that's fine if they genuinely enjoyed that. But I'm sure plenty of people really did enjoy it. Much like the debut of something like Dark Souls, I'm sure that there's just a bit of a bubble, and people would enjoy this before the trend of a ton of these games coming out hits. Of course, that's obvious, maybe. Because one or two will come out and people will unexpectedly really like them, and then the industry will go, hey, wait a minute, for some time now people have really wanted these. Oh wait, go, make them now, go. So we might be right on the edge of that bubble bursting, and we'll see a whole bunch of games like this in like 2 years. As Mr. Food said, it's hilarious how just as you were writing this parlay and the time it took me to do this parlay since you submitted it, there you have played another game that after looking for 4 or 6 years, just in the time of this parlay, you played one other game like that. Maybe more of them are coming out. And again, it was a very popular game as well. That's noteworthy. So just interesting to consider. That I think is by far the biggest reason, is that a lot of people are not in a position where they would enjoy such a thing, and it's very obvious that that is true from the outside. Like if you're a person, I would like to make a game like this, and you take a stroll, in the mall, I feel like it is plain to see that this is like maybe not the time. And that might be wrong, but I think a lot of other people have thought that, scrolling through the mall, if you will, of Steam or whatever. So I think that's a big reason for one. And if you do find these games pretentious and uninteresting, first of all, that's okay. Maybe it's not okay to say that other people are like bad and just trying to sound fancy for enjoying them. You should acknowledge when you act that way that you are poo-pooing some people that really are having interesting, worthwhile human thoughts by enjoying these games, even though, yes, some people are just trying to make themselves look good. Just listen to what the person says and think about it for yourself. Some of those people are just jacking it while on the keyboard, and other people have something to say. Like there's good and bad. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater with that kind of thing. At the same time, you could get enjoyment out of this thing. Anyone could get enjoyment out of this thing. And the reason that you didn't, if you didn't, is probably because it just isn't the right time for it. This may be going back to my video game vacations topic from a few years ago. I got to redo that because that video is not that good, but I think that idea is good. If that game could find the right time in your life, perhaps you would really enjoy it. Indeed, I actually stopped playing halfway through playthrough B of Nier Automata, and when I came back to it, I absolutely loved it and flew through the whole thing. And my partner, this is a real thing that happened, is playing through Nier Automata right now, and she stopped for a few weeks at the exact same part of the game that I stopped at. So I've been waiting, every night she's at the computer and I go, hey, what are you doing? Are you playing Nier Automata? And she goes, no, why? And I go, no, there's no reason. Yeah, what are you playing there? And she goes, oh yeah, it was a game from your list. I'm knocking it out. Not that good so far. And I go, yeah, okay. That's nice of you. You're helping me out. You gonna play more Nier Automata anytime soon? So anyway, we'll see how that goes. Maybe I'll report back in a future Mr. Food Parlay. This ended up being a long one, but I had a lot to say. I will say a few more things that I think caused these games to be delayed. First of all, I think that Nier Automata was like really popular when it came out, but not at all for this thing, I guess, is a critical detail for me. And I would actually argue that in some ways that's a little worse than if it was less popular, because its popularity of a different kind overshadowed these qualities, or made people think that they had gotten the thing everyone else experienced, and thus they didn't look for that other quality. You see, Nier Automata is, for better or worse, organized into multiple playthroughs. Now, these are not the same content. That's a topic for another time. We did a lot of video about it, so you can go look at that if you want. But the result is that I can pretty much guarantee you, and by pretty much guarantee you, I mean looking at the Steam achievements, that almost all of the people that played Nier Automata did not get to the part that Mr. Foot and I talk about a lot in the parlay. About 70+% of them didn't, I guess, if you want a specific number. Therefore, first of all, Nier Automata wasn't a very popular game if we consider it to be popular for this toolset. This toolset part of Nier Automata actually wasn't that popular in the grand scheme of things. It wasn't nothing, don't get me wrong. 30% of the sales of Nier Automata is still a lot of sales of Nier Automata, you know. But I mean, not all those people are going to get it anyway, so that's step one. No time to talk about like the weird different popularity of Nier Automata for now, but maybe another time. Second thing I would name is COVID-19. There was a significant life event. Most people's lives were slowed down in general within the interval of time between Nier Automata's release and now. And so for a good half of that time, there was a big wrench in the works for most people's lives. Simple thing, I just feel like that's relevant. Number 3 is the industry has been pretty hard anyway, and I would argue in some ways not related to Nier Automata. Or COVID, I meant to say COVID, but sure, not related to Nier Automata. As the industry has been going through the growing pains of modernizing and kind of reaching its teenage, young adult years, I do think a lot of people have been fired in the game industry. Like, you could say it like that. Because we're a little bit short on time, let's say that's enough for that point. You get it. And finally, originally, the point that I was trying to make is that we just sitting around are able to come up with the toolset to make a game that does those things that we enjoyed about Nier Automata. So if it's so easy, why haven't other people used those tools? Well, I think that part of it is actually because we are not game developers. It was easier to find those things. The way I'm making this claim is that most game developers don't spend their time focused on this kind of stuff, analyzing games. You hear people in the industry all the time, a few relatives of mine, friends of mine, and also just in general when people discuss games, that do not do what you might describe as like gamer homework, I guess. We, by proxy of not needing to spend all our time doing game design, know more about this subject than those people do, of course. We are professionals at this subject. And they are not. They're professionals at game design. Now, would it behoove a game designer to find a process where they could weave that in? Obviously, yes. Should some game designers developing this type of game, like, make it part of their job to... I'm not saying that game design isn't a real job. I'm just saying, like, pseudo job, playing Nier Automata as part of their job? Yes, is what I'm arguing. But do people do that? I would argue no. And so... with all those factors in play, the number of people who will have noticed that toolset was available to us, if it's so easy to find, might actually be small enough that it explains the lack of these games altogether, I would propose. And again, the fact that there are like a few, surely there'd be at least one. Okay, well, you found 2 in the past few years. Like, there you go. Maybe those are the only ones. It's been funneled enough that, you know, it's not that many. Here's to more games like that. And yeah, I'm really interested in the direction you have in mind for these parlay in the future, that we're going to explore kind of where is we've reset the invisible wall, so where is it now? What is the kind of edge of that? I will very briefly propose a question as a closing thought of my own. How many steps can we take past the horizon of humanity's progress in video games in general? How far can we look ahead? Because we were able to look ahead to the toolset of Nier Automata because it actually is the horizon of video games currently. That just wasn't clear to a lot of people for a while, but it was there. It was just illusorily, it didn't appear to be. But I would argue we are approaching the actual horizon of current game development. Can we go much far past that? Anyway, we'll see. What a parlay, huh? We laughed, we cried, and that was a glorious story. Mr. Foot, thank you for telling us all this. It was a pretty personal parlay, which I thought was cool. Thank you very much for this one, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the series. Folks, if you want your own parlay like this, it doesn't have to be all of this, but it can be if that's what you've got. Whatever you like, you can check the link in the description. We'd love to have you. For now, see you next time.